Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. So this week we are starting a 3-week conversation about The Gift of Failure, this book that we've been reading, or I've been reading. I don't know if you guys have been reading it. I asked Mr. Campbell, who's our assistant principal, to join us today to help with this conversation, knowing that he hadn't read this book. So just to show parents that are like, oh, I haven't gotten the book, I can't join in, that it's okay. The topics are broad enough that you don't need to, it's not a quiz. So we're not in school anymore. So there's no homework. But in preparing for today, I was thinking a lot about, this idea of failure. And I think as a society, certainly as an American society, we have a legitimate fear of failure in our society. We find it a very difficult concept for us to accept. I'm thinking this past week about my own feelings about those of you that you don't know me, you may know this about me. I'm a very big 49er fan. And so obviously this week was a lot of disappointment. And how I've come to accept that disappointment, and just thinking about the excuses that I've made. And I had a conversation with a teacher here yesterday, and he was like, if we just got one more chance, we just had a do-over. And it was like, yeah, and I think that that's a great analogy for our kids and how we need to teach them to deal with failure, because life sometimes doesn't give us do-overs. Sometimes we do get to try again and it's okay, but sometimes we don't. It's over. There's no second chance. And so we have to learn how to accept that and move on. And so that's kind of the broader theme that we're going to be thinking about and talking about over the next couple of weeks. And really, I think overall, this idea of the gift of failure and teaching our kids about failure and how to accept failure, it's really teaching them how to develop self-confidence and be okay with making mistakes and failing sometimes, that they know that they're going to be okay. So how this is going to work, I have questions. I put those questions in my newsletter. We may get through all of them. I may skip around a little bit. Again, if you haven't read the book, that's okay. It's totally okay. Mr. Campbell's here to help me start a conversation. Parents, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to join in, if you want to put stuff in the chat, however you want to help out with this conversation, all is welcome. So my first question, Andrew, is how would you compare your experience in parenting to your parents and how your parents raised you? So the way you're raising your kids and the way you are as a parent to the way your own parents were. And how do you think the challenges of parents have changed over the last several decades? In reading this book, there's a comment in the very beginning, it's on page 15, and there's this comment in there that it doesn't feel good to be the strict parent. And I think that kind of sums up the way I am as a parent. I hate being the strict parent. But when I think about my own parents, especially my mom, I don't think that's something that she ever cared about. She was totally fine being the strict parent. I don't think she worried 1 minute about it. So Andrew, what about you? The way you are as a parent versus the way you're raising your kids?
Yeah, for sure. I'm from that generation. I think a lot of us are from that generation, but I was a latchkey kid. Remember that term, latchkey kid? From the time I was 8 years old, I walked home by myself to an empty house. And so I don't want to call it absentee parenting, but there's a lot more of free range parenting, right? There was you get home, you do your chores, and then you go outside and you play until it was time to come in and basically finish up the day. That was most of my formative years, really. It is definitely different with my own children. I have 3. I have right now a 19-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And for all of them, there was not a lot of They just run outside and go play on your own. I think that's the expectation of our generation as parents, is that that's not what you do. You need to like fill their time almost for them. And I do think I've talked about this with a number of people. I think that does make a big difference between how I grew up and how these kids are growing up. Whether it's socialization or I think going back to this topic of when we were outside and we just played with whoever was there, and there weren't any adults. And if there's a problem, there's a failure, there's something, you guys are just going to figure it out on your own. And these aren't people you necessarily know for years and years and years. I changed houses every 2 years or so. So you're just playing with the kids in the neighborhood. You have to figure out what happens when something goes wrong. And our kids are not doing that. And I think that that's a difficulty that they are facing, that they don't even realize, that maybe we don't even realize all the time, that our kids don't fail socially and have to address that with their peers. I think that's a piece that again goes back to this topic.
Yeah, I think, and times are different now. I mean, I think just like the way our kids and what they do with their own time. I know, like when I was a kid, obviously, I mean, we did have video games. I mean, I don't know, like, there was Atari. And so like there were video games. I remember when I was in high school, we got a Nintendo. And so it's not like that didn't exist, but there wasn't like the cell phone and social media and being able to, like, if you talk to your friends, you had to like physically talk to them on the phone and have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And usually like, it was like, okay, when are we going to like meet up and like make plans? And then you would see your friends in person. I know with just my kids, they don't do a lot of that. They're texting their friends, they're talking to their friends, but they're not outside of school. There's not a lot of like seeing them in person. And so I think, it's definitely a different focus. And I hear what you're saying, like, especially like being a latchkey kid. My mom didn't work when I was little, so I didn't have that. She did when I was in high school. But I like look at my own parenting now and as a working parent and how I deal with that. And my son's going to start high school next year. And the high school is literally a half mile away from us. It is not far. And it's an easy walk. It's on easy streets. There's no like major like intersections that are dangerous or anything like that. But like part of me is like, oh, how is he going to get to school next year? And I like stop myself and I'm like, why can't he just walk? And like, part of it's like, I know my son would much rather stay at home and not go to school. And so it's like, well, will he actually get there? But I think that that's something I need to do as a parent, is teach him, like, that's the expectation. Like, you got to get there. So I don't know if any other parents want to chime in about the way their own parents parented them versus how you parent your own children. And just the differences between that. And I think it's interesting, like seeing my parents now as grandparents, because they seem to like kind of fall into like my more style of parenting now. It's interesting. And I've never had my parents be like, well, why aren't you doing this? They should be able to do that on your own. It's more like, what do you mean you left Nathan by himself? Like, doesn't he need a babysitter? And I'm like, well, he's 13. He can be by himself. And so they're like, whoa, he's spending too much time by himself. And I'm like, he's okay. And so, all right, let's move on to the next question. What kind of motivators do you use in your own home? So like, what do you use to motivate your kids, and why have you chosen that? And in the book, they talk a lot about, because the author of the book is a middle school teacher. And so she gives this example of this student in this family that she was working with, where the student was getting poor grades on spelling quizzes. And then came back after a break, and like all of a sudden her quiz scores were a lot higher. And she asked the student, like, well, what's happening? And it turns out that the parents, for every like 100% she got on these spelling quizzes, the parents were giving her $10. And so, but that in like what the author talks about is that for a short term that worked, but then after a while that stopped working, that the student didn't care about that it was a short-term success. Because, and so this is, the point the author's making in there is that we need to have intrinsic motivations in order to keep doing it. So it's something that we're doing for ourselves. It's not some sort of outside reward. I know as a parent, I have certainly been guilty of bribing my kids to do something. I've also, you try the punishment and that sort of thing, and it doesn't work very well. It's short term, maybe it does, but it doesn't, it's not great. Andrew, what have you found what have you found to be successful, and what have you found that like, oh, that doesn't work?
Same. Bribery happens on occasion. The threat of, negative discipline. We don't honestly follow through all that often with the negative discipline thing. I grew up with a paddle that was used on me, and it was hanging on the oven. So it was just there and as a presence. And
my mom used to carry a wooden spoon around in her purse.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
My mom didn't go so far as to carry it with her, but it was right there, and you'd point to it, and and I kind of refuse to do that with my kids. I have taken away privileges. Most infamously, my oldest was doing poorly in school and wasn't doing the work about middle school age, and the punishment was to remove their books. I went into their room and removed the books so that they couldn't just sit up in their room and read. They had to do their work. But for the most part, I think we've tried to build an intrinsic motivation. Like, these are the expectations we have of you. You are going to do these kinds of things. You're going to find success. You're going to find the things that are, the things that work for you. And we're here to support all of your opportunities to figure out how to make those things successful. And I think that's mostly been successful. It's not always successful. I know we're going to get to it eventually, but yeah, we have to let the kids figure out for themselves really what's the way that they work. Push and prod and be there to support when it doesn't work though.
Yeah, I think so. I find that I have kind of the similar path, like, because like I said, like my mom carried the wooden spoon around in her purse, which honestly, like I think back now, I'm like, that's like that would get a CPS call now. Like that's insane. But I don't believe I was abused as a child. But I, like, as a reaction to the way I was raised, I've never spanked my kids. Like that was something that I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I have definitely leaned more on like bribing my kids, and definitely seeing how it fails after a time. And so having just the kind of the intrinsic, like, this is what you just have to do it. So, it's funny, last night, I have an example for you. With my son, my husband had to supervise basketball. He works at a high school also. And so he wasn't home. And so I was like, oh no, I'm the one that's going to have to make Nathan do his homework. And I my instinct was like, dude, what can I bribe you with to get you to do this homework and not have me like yelling at you? And then I just I'm like, but like talking to him for a little bit and like, hey, what do you have for homework? Do it. And then he was like, well, this is what I have to do for my English class. I have to like do this final project for the house on Mango Street. And I'm like, did you actually read the book? He's like, yeah, I read the book. And I'm like, you did? It blew me away. So, and like he did it on his own. And I was like, what? I need to give my kid more credit. Like I just kind of assumed that I was going to have to bribe him or yell at him or like do something. And but he, like me, just like reminded, hey, you got to do your homework. And he actually did it. Like it was a reminder to me to like not always assume the worst about my kid's motivation and that he just isn't going to want to do it. This topic of motivation and intrinsic rewards, this is something that as a staff, we've been really like having a conversation with for the past year. I think I've mentioned on this in these talks that as a staff last year, we read the book Rating for Equity as a staff. And so we've been like kind of really with a lot of our professional development that we do on collaboration days, talking about the ideas in that book. And really like one of the main themes of that book is that grades are an intrinsic reward for students and that they don't always work, and that we've lost somewhere along, with schooling, when kids start school and like they're in kindergarten, like they first start learning, they like, it's all about learning. They want to learn, and that kids lose that along the way. And it all becomes about grades and it's not about learning anymore. That's a really, it's a really difficult shift to, as a school system, because our whole system is based on grades. Our whole society is based on grades. Eileen, I see your question. Just hang on at the end and we'll address that question for you, okay? So I don't want to get us completely off topic, but hang on and we'll be sure to come back to your question. Okay, so VG said, good morning. My parents' words were the rule of the house for us, and that was the case for most of my friends. Now with my own child, we try to reason and address the why questions. I think that's so true. Like of our like generation, how we were raised, like, our parents, like I said, my mom was super strict, and like that was, or they weren't necessarily always there and they like left us to alone. And so it was kind of like, this is what you're expected to do. And I think a lot of us were raised that way. And the way I think it's really interesting, and now how we're raising our kids, I think we do let our kids question a lot and like, why are we doing this? And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I'm with you with this because I said so at times, because sometimes you're like, no, I'm the parent, this is just the way it's going to be. And that also I think is totally okay. So it kind of gets to the next question, which is what other options do you have if you don't bribe, nag, or impose punishment in order to get the kids to do what we want them to do? And I think sometimes we just have to let them face the consequences. And that, that's the part of teaching them to fail. Like if you're nagging them or bribing them to do their homework and that's not working, and then they don't do their homework, what's the consequence? The bad grades, not doing well in school. I think that is something that it's hard because you don't, and this is going to be kind of the theme of like, when we talk about this, it's hard to see your kid fail. It's hard to see them, not doing their best. And I think as a parent, we want to swoop in and fix it and make excuses about, well, this is why this happened. It's like me with the 49ers this week. I'm making all sorts of excuses about what happened. And if this hadn't happened, it would have been perfect. They would have won. And sometimes it's just, no, he failed. It didn't, like, it's not happening. And so teaching them, that resilience, it's super hard though, as a parent to watch that. Andrew, have you had where you had to like watch your kid fail and like just sit back and be like, okay?
Yeah. My oldest, like Ginny, graduated in the year of COVID. And there was all kinds of difficulties, like I'm sure all of us had to deal with during that year. And the motivation to get up, to make sure that they were in class. I had my three daughters and my nephew at my house while I was trying to do work, and they were all in school at the same time. And so trying to check in with everybody and everything. No, if you guys have to do it on your own, I had to deal with the little ones. My two older ones, you guys are old enough, you should be able to handle this on your own. You're in high school. And that didn't all plan out. And it got towards the end of the year, and it was like, look, you've got to do X, Y, and Z in order to just even graduate, let alone try to apply to a college and to get into a college. And again, they're to support and they're to encourage and they're to try to check in and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But it's their work to get done. It's their things that they have to finish and get done. And here's a trick that I know that I do, and Ginny, I wonder if you do this too. Sometimes as a parent, I need to communicate with a staff member at a school. Given that I work at a school, I generally the first time I write an email, it's on my personal email account, so that it's like, hey, I'm the father of, and just wanted to follow up on these couple of things. And then if I don't like the answer, that's when I'll use my professional email account that says like, oh yeah, by the way, associate principal at Piedmont Hills High School. And I don't really like the way that you're dealing with things, but I don't want to step in like that very often. And I haven't had to do it very often, but that's that same idea. You got to let the kid go and do what they need to do, and they're going to fail sometimes. And it's, my youngest is very passionate about her chosen like activity, which is ballet. And she gets really upset when, she auditions for a part and doesn't get the part. And it's like, okay, so how do you improve so that next year things are more what you want? And it's a lot of what that parenting is. It's like, yeah, go strive, go do it. And then when you failed, all right, well, let's get ready for the next time. Let's keep that in your mind of like, this is how it felt when you didn't get what you wanted. Now, how do we prepare for it next time?
I admire you that you send the first email from your personal email.
I do, yeah.
I always use my work email,
right.
And but you're making me think that maybe I shouldn't do that. I mean, I agree when they're giving you the runaround. It's kind of, there's not a lot of perks of being in education. It's like one of the perks that you can be like, no, I know what I'm talking about. But I think, you're making me think, because, Nathan's starting high school next year. It's a different school district, kind of like with our feeder schools, like the high school district is separate. So maybe I'll start fresh, and I'll start with my personal email because I definitely like, with that signature line, principal of Piedmont Hills High School. And I definitely noticed when like we went into like his school has in the fall, like just the automatic conferences with like all the teachers. And so when my husband walked in, they were like, oh, so you're a principal. And I'm like, yeah, I am. So, but what we're talking about here is, this idea of teaching our kids constructive and adaptive response to failure, that like you see failure as something that's actually good, that's something that you can learn from, and that, you adapt what you're doing as a result of failing. And so that you learn from it and then you change. And so that hopefully you learn from this idea that you learn from your mistakes. So my question for you, Andrew, this is a loaded question. How do you model this for yourself? Do you talk to your kids about times that you yourself have failed and model how you respond to that?
I don't have to like tell the story if they see it happen at home, right? Because I do most of the like I do the handyman stuff at the house, right? So last week, as you know, my toilet started leaking. And of course, we noticed this at the end of the night. And so it's, all right, I'm going to do everything I can to make the repairs and get everything done. And I sat trying to fix the toilet for like 2 hours. And in the morning, we're calling a plumber. So that's this very simple one right there. Like I made my effort, I tried. I've got to go to somebody else because they're the expert in doing the thing. And I'll ask that person and maybe I'll get some clues, and next time, hopefully I can handle the situation. But yeah, failure definitely happens. And we decompress at the end of the day quite often with our kids. The youngest one came home with this term of talking about your pows and your wows. A wow, what's your wow moment for the day? What's something that something worked really well for you, and what's your pow moment where it didn't work out for you? And that kind of became this thing where we do pretty often of like, what's something that happened really good for you at school, and then what's something that happened not so great on your day, and then so how do you build from that? And as the adults, we participate. So it's modeling that, like, nope, kind of messed up, but I'm going to learn from it, and now I know how to do so this next time. And it definitely isn't perfect. My youngest has a lot of tantrums still, but we do try to model that quite a lot, actually.
I really like that, the pows and the wows. I'm gonna have to, maybe I'll bring that home. I don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm as great talking about when stuff is screwed up. Sure, stuff around the house that's like right there, because like it's like right there and evident. But you know, like when something has happened at work, for example, that I'm not happy about, that I felt like I could have done something better, I'm not real great about talking about that with my family. And I feel like I should probably be better about that. It's really hard though, because I'm the type of person that I kind of like to like curl up in a ball and lick my wounds type of thing. And you know, but I think about like, how am I modeling for my kids how I learn from it? Because certainly I screw up, and, you know, don't do things right all the time. We're human. That's what we do. Okay, Vincent put in the chat, my kids usually come to me when they're not getting a grade or fail in certain areas with an explanation of what they can do for improvement. My approach seems to work by listening to them effectively and not to punish them and offer help. I think that's really great. First off, Vincent, I think it's really great that your kids are coming to you and like with like, this is what's happened. I think that's awesome. And I think your approach by like listening and not like being like, oh, you screwed up and like that's going to be a punishment. I think that's, you know, and like also like not coming in with the offer to help, because what I see a lot of times, you know, in my role, and Mr. Andrew, you probably see the same thing. I see parents they don't get mad at their kids, but they want to come in and fix the situation. And like, what's wrong? What happened? How do we fix this? And, you know, instead of being like, okay, that happened and we need to learn from it. I think that that's a really great approach, which actually brings us to my next question. You guys might have heard of this person, Stanford University psychologist and mindset author, Carol Dweck. If you're in the education field, she's fairly famous. Divides people into two mindsets, fixed or growth mindsets. What is your own mindset, and what mindset do you model for your child? And I want to actually, in case you guys have never heard of these terms, fixed or growth mindset, I have some definitions for you. Okay, so this is from the book on page 38. A person with a fixed mindset believes that intelligence, talent, or ability are innate and remain the same throughout life, no matter what he does. So basically this idea, if you have a fixed mindset, you're this smart, this is what you know, like you have this much talent and you're never going to grow in that. Those with growth mindsets are motivated to learn for learning's own sake, because they believe that by pushing and stretching themselves, they can do more and become more accomplished. And so I think for myself, I do think I have a growth mindset for myself. I fear that sometimes with my family members, I have a fixed mindset attitude towards them. That like, oh, that's just the way they are. Like, that's, you know, Nathan like doesn't care about school. He's never going to care about school. You know, my husband is super disorganized. He's never going to like, you know, get it together. And like, I have to constantly always be reminding him, you know, my daughter is always going to, you know, kind of be emotionally fragile. And like, I always have to be careful with how I phrase things with her. So I feel like with myself, I have a growth mindset and know like, oh, I can learn from this and I can do better. I think I fear that I have more of a fixed mindset about my loved ones, which I like. That's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I need these own self-realizations. What about you, Andrew?
I believe in the potential of a growth mindset. I definitely think that people should be trying different things, find the things that work for them essentially. I'll be honest, I'm kind of the opposite. I don't, I like to try different things. I like to do, I don't necessarily feel like there's things that I can learn. I don't necessarily think I can learn how to do everything. I'm not great with technology, and I get very frustrated with it pretty quickly. And so I don't want to put that effort into like, how do I get better at that? But I try to get my own children to move past that, and all right, hey, try this. And it's, especially if it's like in school, you have to get something done. There's an assignment, you have to do it. Okay, well, what things can we do to get you ready to make sure that you're successful in that thing?
Yeah, this was like this question, this idea was something I've been like thinking about and pondering. And one thing that I've just, I feel like coming from the pandemic, and the first time that Yvonne and I read this book was during the distance learning year. So this is the second time we're reading this book. And so during the distance learning year, I felt like we had maybe different responses to this question. And one thing that I've just noticed coming back from the pandemic is we are for very like solid, like important reasons, very aware of our students' mental health needs, our own mental health needs, and being very protective of, and wanting to protect our students' mental health and hopefully our own mental health. I feel like as a society, we have much greater awareness, and that's good. But I also wonder and fear, I have this like worry about, are we teaching resilience? Like have we, I had this conversation with some good friends of mine this past weekend, who all of us have, our oldest children are all the same age. That's how we actually became friends. We were like mommy friends when they were little, and now like we're now adults. And so our kids are adults, but we're still good friends. And so we were talking, and our oldest kids have had a lot of similar problems. I think that this generation of kids, especially with like the pandemic and everything, mental health issues, like really high anxiety, things like that. And so talking about our kids and how our kids are like coping with this. And I fear that like, like I see sometimes with my daughter, she's like, oh, well, I have anxiety, so I can't do that. I'm not going to be able to do that because I have anxiety. And I like worry that we're not teaching resilience and like getting past that. Like, yes, you have to acknowledge this is something that you struggle with, but that's not the end all be all. Like you can be resilient and learn from this. And I think it's a really fine line, and it's a really fine line we have to walk as parents. I'm not like saying this is an easy thing at all, to like understand, your children's mental health needs and still push them and teach them that resilience. It's really, it's hard. And there's this quote from the book, and it says, overparenting undermines so much of what contributes to a growth mindset and therefore inhibits intrinsic motivation. So this idea of overparenting, which means you're coming in, you're doing everything for your kid. So take away your kid's anxiety, like you're going to fix everything for them, so that they can, you smooth the path for them. I think that, I think Yvonne calls this, what did she call it? Plowing, like you're plowing the field, but she's a different term. I can't remember what it is. But this idea that you're just like smoothing everything out for your kids so that they don't have any bumps in the road. And I think that that's something that we have to be really careful about that. I don't know, Andrew, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that this is one of those places where my wife and I diverge a little bit, where I think she's more likely to do some of the stuff for the kids, and I'm more like, let them try it and figure it out. And so I mean, that's tough coming into this conversation, not having thought about that too much. But I can say that in my experience in the campus is I see a lot of that as well, of like our kids are often not really very resilient. We get a lot of students who find it very difficult to manage when there's not success for them. And that's it almost makes me want to rethink, like, can you intentionally make kids fail a little bit and then be there for them to, like, fail at minor things, and then just be there for them to, like, okay, that's, you weren't able to do that, that's okay, right? My nephew, I think, is a good example. Thinking about this particularly, he plays soccer and he wants to be very, very, very good. And he's not. I mean, he enjoys it, but really it's every game where they lose, whether it's his fault or not, whatever, but there's massive amounts of frustration, to where basically the whole day is over for him. And they play 2 or 3 games a weekend, and so there's that potential for that, like, every weekend. And then you say the conversation has begun of, like, why are we doing this with him? Why does he in soccer if this is going to be the result? If he can't learn how to handle a loss, then maybe this isn't what's best for him right now.
Yeah, I think it's and I think, it's that, like, the small things, because obviously you want to, we've talked about, like, when your kids have, like, more severe emotional needs and mental health needs, like, you have to be really, really careful. Like, this could go very, very badly. And so, but looking at, like, the small ways that you can teach them this. In the book, she gives this whole example of her, like, elementary school age child, how he had forgotten his homework, and he, I guess, left the house and was at the bus stop, and she could see him still from the house. She could see the homework, and, like, she didn't stop. And, like, she thought, like, and I guess she was home the whole day, and she, like, had that homework and knew that she could easily drop it off at the school. And she, like, made this choice of, like, no, I'm not going to bring him the homework. And when her son comes home, she's, like, fully, like, he's had a terrible day, that this was so, like, terrible for him. He, like, had to miss recess because he didn't turn in his homework. And he's like, no, it's okay. My teacher and I talked about it. He helped me come up with strategies that I'm not going to forget at my homework again. And so, like, he actually, like, it was a great thing. Like, he learned some things, and, like, how to, like, okay, I forgot to put my homework in my backpack. What can I do to not do that again? And so looking at those, like, small ways that you can help your kids, like, that's going to build up, where, again, they're going to build that resilience and, like, learn from that. And, with your nephew in soccer, like, teaching how, like, to deal with loss is important. Like, because, like, a small loss, like a soccer game, versus, like, a major, like, life altering loss. I mean, like, that can, like, those are really important lessons. And so this is really getting to, like, the book talks about, being a controlling parent, where you're controlling every aspect of your child's life and, like, protecting them from everything, where they don't have, you make all of the decisions for them, you protect them, like, you bring them the homework that they forgot. That's a controlling parent, versus an autonomy supportive parent. And, like, this idea of, like, teaching them this resilience. And so I'm going to read you guys, this is on page 47. Autonomy supportive parenting is not negligent parenting. It is not permissive parenting. Autonomy supportive parents establish specific and clear expectations, make themselves physically and emotionally present, and offer guidance when kids get frustrated or need redirection. The best part about being an autonomy supportive parent is that all of the negative stuff we do to get our children to do the things that we want them to do, nagging, nitpicking, hovering, directing, stops. These parenting techniques are destructive to our relationships with our kids anyway, so parenting in their absence is more peaceful and enjoyable affair all around. And so it's kind of interesting, like, this idea, and I think like the point that the book's making here is that it's not easy. Like, if you haven't been parenting this way, if you've been more of the controlling parent that's controlling everything, you kind of have to wean yourself off of that. It's difficult to all of a sudden stop. And but it's, it's a good thing. So there's a question in the chat. What should we say do when our kids compare us to our other parents' rules about letting their kids play online games, using the phone anytime they want, while we have a restriction in our house? I wonder if we're too strict about this nowadays, and look like playing online games is the only way of entertainment for them. So I think that's, I have two minds of this, Eileen. And Andrew, I'm interested in what you have to say too. I think that in general, it's not great when your kids compare your rules to somebody else's. And I think you have to be like, well, this is just the way it is here. This is our house, and I get to make the rules. I think that that's your right as parents. I think that, and we've talked about this when we've talked about social media and like that sort of thing. I think as parents also in the year of 2023, we have to acknowledge the world that we live in, and that their phones and technology are a huge part of their life. Online gaming is a huge part of their life. And for a lot of kids, that is the social outlet, because it's not just like they're doing it by themselves. And I think a parent, if you're not doing the gaming yourself, so you don't really know, you don't realize that aspect to it. But that for a lot, especially more introverted, shy child, that could be a really emotional social outlet for them that I think that we shouldn't diminish and just ignore. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, same. Like I was saying at the beginning, as a kid in my generation, you basically socialize by just going outside and playing with whoever was there. My kids don't really do that. The kids that I tend to work with don't really do that. So this is their socialization, whether it's through actual texting, through social media accounts like Instagram and stuff like that, through online gaming, whatever. That's how they're socializing with each other. And again, my youngest is 9, and it's already they've got a chat group. They're talking to each other through Roblox as a game where they're online. And we allow the chat group, and it's on our phones. And so we're kind of monitoring what's being said and how often they're talking with one another. We also know the parents of the kids that she's talking to. So we kind of check in with them and see how they're handling the situation. But we haven't let her go to the online gaming thing yet, because again, that feels like it's a little more difficult to kind of manage, and we just don't really have that yet. And be honest as well, my nephew lives 2 doors down, and they go to the same school together. They come home together, and so there's socialization built into the family. So that's a little bit less of the concern there. I do want to share a quick story of a student that I had years ago who said that she got in trouble. She was texting her boyfriend too many times, and her mom was really upset. I said, well, how many times did you text him? And she said, this last month I texted him 6,000 times. I was like, 6,000 times. We did the calculation. It was something like a one text every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day. And so I was like, I was kind of baffled. I was like, it seems like you could just call him. Why don't you call him? And she was very adamant. She's like, oh, I don't want to talk to him. I just want to text him. And I think that's a piece. I mean, that was very enlightening to me of like, again, this was years ago even, but that sort of is a mentality that our kids kind of have that we're going through right now. So I don't actually want to talk to people. I want to get my thought out there, but I don't necessarily really want to talk to people. So yeah, it's been interesting to watch this happen, both as an educator and with my own children.
Yeah. So Eileen, I get to give you some advice, because I think that's what you're asking for. I think this is an opportunity to have a conversation with your kids about what do they see as reasonable, and what can you live with, and come up with some sort of compromise. I think all kids are going to agree with some sort of limits. I don't think there's any teenagers out there that are going to be like, let me do whatever I want, whenever I want. They may think that, but they actually really don't want that. They do want some sort of limits and parameters. And so coming up with what they can see as reasonable and what you can agree with as a parent, and finding that compromise is probably the best thing, the best advice I can give. And maybe it's like they're allowed to do it, but at this time of night, like 9 o'clock at night, no, it's off, like that, whatever, like, you can set that, and, or maybe it's just something they can do on the weekends, and coming up with some sort of agreement as a family. I think that that's, probably your best bet. Okay, this actually like leads into my final question for us. What is self-efficacy and why is it essential for growth? I'm actually going to give you guys a definition of self-efficacy. It is the confidence in the ability to exert control over one's own motivation, behavior, and social environment. So basically, it's this idea of self-efficacy that you can control your environment. You can make changes. It's kind of like that goes into that growth mindset. You can make the changes needed to be successful. I think this is a really important thing, especially for Piedmont Hills and our community at Piedmont Hills. Self-efficacy questions are something that come up, every year I send out the panorama survey. We do it in the fall and we do it in the spring. The self-efficacy questions are always our lowest score for our students. This is something that our students specifically at Piedmont Hills need to build. They need to learn how to do this for themselves. And so I think that's why having this as a topic for the Zooms for like, and this is where for the next 3 weeks, this is our topic. I think that's why I think it's so important. It's something that I talk to the teachers about constantly, about how do you get kids, one thing we see is the kids don't ask questions. They don't talk to the teacher when they don't understand. They just assume that they're the only ones that don't understand. When I promise you, if they have that question, there are at least 15 other kids in that class that have the same question, but nobody's asking. So teaching our kids to like do this and to like have that self-confidence in themselves, to like know that they can have that control. I think this is really, really important. Andrew, you got any comments about that? It's a heavy topic, I know.
No, but I think that's definitely the same thing that I've seen. Just that ability to just ask, to talk to an adult. It's confidence, right? Build that skill of being able to even identify what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you need, and being able to communicate that to people. And that's I think you just have to build that like with your own children. Just like, hey, what is it? Ask them what they're asking for. What is it that I can do for you? What is that you need, right? And what, other than I don't like that teacher, what is it that's not working for you in that situation? How do we address that as a need?
Yeah. So I think I have a feeling we've probably have more questions now than we have answers. And that's okay, because we're only a third of the way through this book. If you guys have not picked up a copy of this book, this is by far and I don't read a ton of parenting books, but I have read some, and this is by far the best book about it's because it's about parenting and education, and it's very good. So again, it's called The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey. The link to Amazon is in my newsletter. If you haven't picked it up, I recommend. I don't think you'll be disappointed in this book. I've learned a lot from this book, and even reading it the second time, I'm learning, I'm picking up even more. So we will, I'll have a new set of questions for next week, and we will talk about this again next week. I hope you guys will join us. Thank you, everyone. And then